But for now, we're going to groove into 1973, when the wall of sound with the Grateful Dead was just becoming itself. It was coming into fruition. You're listening to The Wizard, and you're hearing Dick's Picks, Volume 28, from the Prushing Municipal Auditorium in Lincoln, Nebraska. 2/26/73. This is Eyes of the World. Up next, Brian Anderson, Loud and Clear.
Summer home. Ain't got time to call you home.
WZRD Chicago, that's 88.3 FM, The Wizard, Chicago's home for freeform since 1974. I have with me in the studio Brian Anderson. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing so well, Megan. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to have you here. It's
gosh.
Really fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the Grateful Dead's 60th anniversary this year.
It's all happening.
Crazy. So what, 65 was when it all kind of started, right?
That's when it all got going, yeah. And that's really when the story of this book got going.
Yeah.
This book that I just finished writing is coming out in a couple days here, June 17th.
It's so beautiful. Like,
thanks.
just having it in my hands is like, oh, this is a pleasure to have.
Yeah.
Tell everybody what it's called and what the premise is.
The book is called Loud and Clear, The Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound and the Quest for Audio Perfection. And the book is really the full story of the sound system that we now know as the Wall of Sound, right? This was a groundbreaking piece of technology that the Grateful Dead and their circle of audio wizards and crew members and sound consultants and all sorts of people developed over a span of years, sort of beginning right in the earliest days of the band in 1965 and sort of culminating in 1974 with this massive mountain of speakers, that clocked in at around 75 tons.
Whoa.
It was, 3 stories tall, anywhere between, 60 to 100 feet wide, depending on the venue. So this book is the full story of how this thing came to be. And it is not a technical tome. It's not really even like a gear book per se.
Yeah.
It digs into, a lot of the really innovative, ahead of its time work that the Dead were doing in pursuing better sound at a time when there was no such thing as a musical PA, right?
Right.
But it's really a people story. It's a story about all the people who were sort of behind the scenes in the room who were helping actualize and design this groundbreaking sound system. So it really begins at the earliest days of the band. One thing that, I sort of realized very early on when I was working on this book is that the Wall of Sound didn't drop out of the clear blue sky one day in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people, they point to March 23rd, 1974, at the Cow Palace. The famous sound test is what it was billed as sort of like the quote unquote first Wall of Sound show, or like the debut of the Wall of Sound. And that show was momentous for sure in the evolution of the sound system. But really, this was a years-long project. And there were so many sort of pivotal moments along the way building up to this thing, right? So the book sort of tracks this whole journey sort of year by year through all the different iterations of the sound system as it was sort of evolving and morphing and growing into what we now know as the Wall of Sound.
Wow. This is really cool. As I was telling Brian before we got on air, we know about the Wall of Sound being into the Dead and knowing that this was a pretty iconic thing. I've never seen any other band quite try to make a wall of sound. And when you open the cover of this book, it says, quite frankly, 28,000 watts, 600 speakers, 48 amplifiers, 10 band members, and 1 wall of sound. Like, I had to reread that a few times to really take it in because, I know what it looks like. I know that it happened, but, there's this much content, a whole book's worth, that never has been written about this. And it's really fascinating.
It is, yeah. And, just sort of to give you an idea of, like, how this book project came together in 2015, so 10 years ago at this point, I wrote and I published an initial story about the Wall of Sound when I was an editor at the time at Vice. And Vice had a science and technology vertical called Motherboard, which is a really, really great website. It's no longer around, but it was wonderful when it was in its heyday. And I knew I wanted to write about the Wall of Sound to sort of, be able to cover this this like very innovative piece of technological history from sort of like a sound reinforcement standpoint. So it like sort of fit the purview of the publication, but it was also a way to kind of like Trojan horse my love for the Grateful Dead into like, you know, the Vice newsroom at the time.
Yeah.
So I spent maybe like a year and a half working on that story. And just by sheer coincidence, it came out the weekend of the Chicago shows of the Fare Thee Well
Oh, wow.
run. So that was like early July 2015 is when that story came out.
Cool.
And it ended up getting a bunch of attention, which feels good, you know, as a journalist. Like you want people to read or consume, watch, listen, whatever, to the stories that you put out. So that felt really cool. And, you know, a lot of people came out of the woodwork telling me that they had like read the story and they were like psyched on it. But I realized very quickly in just like the matter of days and weeks after that story came out that there was so much more for me to dig into. And I realized that that initial story, which, you know, mind you, it was like a 9,000 word web story. So that's a lot of words.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, sort of foolishly after that came out, I was like, wow, surely this is the definitive take on the Wall of Sound. No one's going to go in this deep. Like, I think I did it. But yeah, it didn't take long for me to realize, like, I just barely got to scratching the surface. Like, maybe there's like a book here that I could do one day.
Yeah.
So I kind of like filed the idea away, remained obsessed with it over the years, right? And just kind of like kept gathering bits of string, so to speak, over the years, you know, doing like the survey of basically every Grateful Dead book that is out there, doing the survey of, you know, all the Grateful Dead scholarship out there, just getting like the full lay of the land. And it sort of dawned on me that it's amazing that like no one has written this book. And at a certain point, you know, like with any sort of big project, but like with this book project, it got to a point where I sort of realized after it was kind of gaining momentum that like, well, I guess I'm the person who's going to write this book. Like it was sort of, it got like past the point of no return. And I was like, I think I'm going to do this.
100%.
But there's so much to dig into. Like sort of, as I mentioned, like, you know, we think of like the Wall of Sound proper in 1974, you know, a lot of deadheads, and not even deadheads, just, you know, folks who appreciate music, you know, they know the Wall of Sound and sort of how it kind of peaked in that year. But to tell the full story, like you got to really start at the beginning. So
Yeah.
I had to go way, way back to, you know, the pre-Dead rumblings, you know, even pre-Warlocks, like way, way back in the day, and just sort of uncover those very early signals, you know?
Yeah.
So it was fun going back to, you know, that very, very like formative time for the band and those musicians as they were starting to come together and realizing that they needed better gear, you know, like the state of the art at the time was pre-war technology, and they realized really early that it just wasn't going to cut it for them. So like they needed to quest for something better.
I mean, and to be able to have that insight at that point and say like, you know, we want it to sound as good as it possibly can. I mean, maybe the Grateful Dead definitely is why I search for the greatest sound, you know, because I'm almost spoiled in a way.
Yeah.
And all the bands that have come after them in that world, I think, want to strive for that. It's amazing that you've decided to go from that 9,000 word article to then making this book, and I'm so glad you did.
No, thanks.
And the synchronicity of, you know, the 2015 shows, we're now 10 years after the 50th anniversary of the Grateful Dead. You know, some of these pictures in the book are iconic. To see the way it evolved from the early days and the different iterations and the way they rearranged it. Even like the one I'm looking at from 1973 November in Tempe, Arizona. It's more, you know, horizontal than it is vertical.
Yep.
So, you know, we just think of kind of what the inside of the book looks like. That's what we know of as the Wall of Sound. But this took time, and it took troubleshooting, and it took, I mean, one of the things I'm most interested in is how do they travel with this stuff? How, and were venues, you know, about it? Were they okay with it?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, over the course of the book, I sort of, I give a sense of like some of the stats, right? Like how much the rig was weighing in like at any given point.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing was just like rapidly, their sound system manifest was just like rapidly scaling up in terms of like just the sheer like tonnage, but also just like the amount of space they needed to assemble
100%.
this giant sound system.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of these venues that they were rolling into at the time, and, just for context, it's like they were playing, hockey rinks and like college auditoriums and college gymnasiums. And, in rolls this, psychedelic-sized crew with all of this gear. And quite often, venue staff and personnel would be like, what on earth? Like, who are you? Like, you're going to stack all of these speakers up? Like, and how much power do you need? Like, we can't supply the power that you need. But
yeah, that's true.
But what ended up happening very early on, the Dead realized that these venues often couldn't supply enough juice, right? They couldn't supply enough electricity. So they would travel with their own power.
Wow.
All their own generators, had their own dedicated truck for all the power.
Whoa.
Just because they couldn't rely on venues to supply what they needed, and the show must go on, right? So yeah, they were traveling with not even just like the custom speakers and the amplifiers and the staging and the scaffolding.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had their own power too. And you sort of alluded to like how this thing was changing quite literally like show to show.
Mm-hmm.
As they were sort of figuring all of this stuff out. Each show, that the sound system, it was a little bit different just in the way it was configured. And of course, each performance space, like each venue, each hall, if it was outdoors, they had to, take into consideration all sorts of like atmospheric factors. So like the wind, namely. So you've got like all of these things that they needed to consider, and they wanted to provide the best sound, not only for, folks who were right up front, like on the rail, right at like the lip of the stage, but they were really focused on the individual in like the furthest seat back. Like they wanted to deliver quality sound to that person, just as like someone who was right up front would experience it. So yeah, if you look at, and I spent a lot of time like looking at photos basically of like every show that I could in these like on-ramp years into the Wall of Sound, and you see, yeah, that like the way the speakers were stacked, they like certain types of speakers they were using would often be like, they would fall sort of in the same place, but you could see like certain boxes would be like angled this way and that to just like get the full coverage. So one of the neat things about the Wall of Sound is that it was designed precisely so that it didn't have to be set up exactly the same way every show, because every performance space was a little bit different.
Yeah.
So it kind of had like that malleability, I guess. But yeah, every show was different. It was fits and starts, trial and error, every show. And you mentioned like just, what was it like just carting this stuff around the country and then, over to Europe too.
Mm-hmm.
And it was outrageous sort of what they were doing. Quite often, venue like truck call, like load in times would be usually like 8 or 9 a.m.
Yeah.
But if you sort of work back from that, the crew had been driving all night from the previous show.
Yeah.
And at the time, the Dead had it written into their rider that they needed to have 5 hours of playing time, including like their set break. And if they weren't guaranteed 5 hours, they would not play.
Wow.
So like that was like a hard and fast rule with them. But 5 hours of playing time. Doors usually opened at like 6. The show would start around 7. So that goes till like midnight. And then, a little bit of party time happens, of course.
Have some recreation.
You got to have a little just cut loose time.
Yeah.
And then, probably 2 hours to just like break everything down, load it into the truck, drive to the next show. So they were rolling out of the venue probably around, 2 a.m. at the earliest, probably like 3, 4 a.m.
Yeah.
is when they're rolling out, driving literally all night to the next venue and like immediately starting it all over again.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a grind. One of the dead roadies, Joe Winslow, who is no longer around, but there's a quote from him. He said that the road turns you into gristle. So yeah, it was a real grind, and they were pulling off some superhuman feats just to set this thing up and tear it down.
Wow.
Every show. And then, like I said, bring it over to Europe. They did it in 72, an early iteration of the sound system that would become the Wall of Sound, right? Of course, the iconic Europe 72 tour. Mm-hmm. They were using sort of not quite like a prototype Wall of Sound, but it would soon sort of morph into a prototype by like the end of 72, early 73. But, 72, they brought, however many tons of gear over to Europe. And then they did it again in 74. In September 74, they brought like a streamlined version of the Wall of Sound, which came in at around, I think, 38 tons, right? So It wasn't the full like 75-ton behemoth, but still in that age, to bring that much gear over to Europe because rental systems weren't going to cut it. And they had spent so long building that thing up from scratch that they were going to bring it to Europe because nothing else would sort of,
work at this point.
Exactly.
They were used to already having it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So
couldn't just be on a regular PA system. I don't know how they transitioned after that to just a regular
I know. System. Yeah. I feel like there's a whole, it's funny. Dan Healy, who was, an early dead sound man and was sort of an integral figure in this story. I, did a bunch of interviews with him for the book, and he was like, Brian, like the sound, it took like a quantum leap after the Wall of Sound, and I was like, that's a whole other book.
Yeah,
like,
I was gonna say, I can't hear, my brain won't take that in. But that's a question too, is like, how did you even manage from that? Because when you have like this pinnacle, this thing that no one has ever done, and you're, I'm looking at these pictures, like you said, some of these speakers are angled in certain ways to try to get these people all the way in the back. They're concerned about the guy who bought the cheap ticket because they want everybody to hear it, the best they can. And it's a whole thing. I've done a little bit of audio stuff in my day, and I'm fascinated by it, just working a mixer and trying to make the sound the best, right?
For sure.
And thinking about, which I never really thought about, but how do you get that same sound to the people way in the back without a delay? And so, like, it's just, they thought of a lot of things. And again, like, it's a whole thing to have to bring it, to have to get the crew to do it, to have 5 hours of playing time, but then so many more hours. I mean, I don't even know how you set that up in 2 hours. That's like a regular load in, let alone like,
I know.
They were wizards at this. Like,
for sure. Yeah, no, they got it down to a science. They were like a well-oiled machine by, 73 with like the prototype Wall of Sound, and certainly by 74. Things had really become mechanized by that point, and the divisions of labor were such that it was very clear like whose job was what.
Yeah.
But yeah, load in at 8 or 9, they would have, everything unloaded from the trucks and sort of stacked up by noon.
Wow.
Take a lunch break and then spend the afternoon like wiring the whole thing up.
Yeah.
And then if there was time for a sound check, they would run a sound check, but quite often there wasn't enough time to do a sound check. Yeah.
You're just like, I hope it all works.
Right, exactly. So like a lot of shows in this era, like, the first song or 2 or 3 even kind of
sound check
function is basically a sound check. Yeah.
Wow. And you don't really think about that as you're listening to 1 and 2 and 3, but now I will.
For sure. Yeah. You can hear them, working out some kinks in the system. It was fun sort of, obviously listening to so many shows for research, which is really great. But scrubbing through like all of the tuning sections, all of the like between song banter, especially like at the beginning of a lot of these shows when they're like working through some technical difficulties.
Yeah.
It was very fun to, pick up when like, Garcia or Weir or Lesh would like, call out to some road crew member, hey, Sparky, I need like a little bit more of this or that, or can you tweak this, that, or the other thing? Like it was fun sort of like just combing through all of like the almost like non-musical passages of these recordings just to like provide all the context for what it took to keep this thing, the Wall of Sound, sort of going and like how to feed it. And it was a very like, it was a finicky thing. And in the book, I sort of work to build up the Wall of Sound like as the main character in the book. And the band and the crew and all of these people who were like orbiting around it were like working in service of this thing. And some nights the Wall of Sound, it could be cranky.
Yeah.
But other nights it could just be like soaring, and it was a rocket and everyone was going into the stratosphere, but it could be a little unpredictable sometimes. But it was fun sort of building up, this mass of like inanimate equipment, right? Like a non-human entity, like building it up sort of as its own like living, breathing megawatt protagonist in its own story. That was very fun to do.
I kind of love that, being able to, personify something that is obviously living and breathing. It's part of this whole thing. It's all integral to, if that doesn't work, the show's not going to go on.
Yeah.
So I love it. I say some days it's cranky, some days it's just, beaming with light and so ready to rock, but it's just like a human being. You don't know, especially because the configuration could be changed every time. So you're putting all these variables in it. But I think also is kind of what that whole band was about was let's try this and just see what happens. And they like to fly by the seat of their pants,
For sure, yeah. I mean, everything about the Dead in that era was just like taking the experimentation as far out as you could. And like, we don't know what's going to happen, but let's see, let's try it. Why not? And like kind of the funny thing is that there are instances where a song would completely fall apart because, some technical,
right.
So something would like, a speaker would blow or something like that. And, there's a famous instance at the Cow Palace in 1974, the sound test, like I mentioned, the beginning of playing in the band. Everything falls apart. The wheels come off.
Oh, gosh.
And the band just has to stop playing. And when that happened, the band and the audience were all sort of in that moment together, right? And one of the things about the Wall of Sound is that it got rid of, monitor speakers that are traditionally like at a musician's feet,
right,
to sort of like fold the sound back at them so that they could
hear themselves.
Exactly. So the Wall of Sound put all of the monitors behind the band.
Huh.
So there was really like no separation between the band and the audience. It's like everyone was sort of...
There was nothing in between them and now at this point. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So everyone was sort of in like the soup together. Like everyone was in the same sound field. So if things went off the rails because, something in the Wall of Sound blew and it needed to be like fixed quickly by a roadie.
In real time while they're playing.
In real time. Exactly. Yeah. The band was sort of like naked to the audience, right?
Right. They couldn't hear themselves or maybe, they're just going with the flow. Obviously.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And like that sort of, harkens directly back to the acid tests in the early 60s, which I talk about in the book, sort of forming like the model for which the Dead would sort of hold itself through the Wall of Sound and really to like the end of the band in 1995.
Okay.
And the thing about the acid test was that, the performers and, the Dead were kind of like the de facto house band at the acid tests.
And this was to give people who have no idea what we're talking about a little clarity of like the San Francisco-ish area.
Yes, the acid tests were sort of psychedelic fueled audio visual happenings that occurred on the West Coast from, Portland down to Los Angeles.
Cool.
And they were sort of instigated by the novelist Ken Kesey, who was sort of, kind of riding high on the fame that came with his first novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and his troupe of merry pranksters who were kind of like a roving like performance art troupe.
Mm-hmm.
But the Dead sort of got in with Kesey and his crew, and they would throw these acid tests where, the admission would be to pay $1 at the door, and you would get a cup of, acid spiked Kool-Aid, and you would down that. And if you sort of were still standing, basically, by the end of the night, you kind of like passed the test.
Oh, okay, got it.
Right.
And this is LSD we're talking about.
This is LSD, yes, when LSD was still legal at the time.
It was legal
So
at the time.
like late 65, early 66.
Okay.
The acid tests were happening. So the Dead were sort of the house band at a lot of these at these events. And there were only around maybe like a dozen of these. There weren't too many, but they were so sort of like formative that they kind of, set the model for which the Dead would follow through the Wall of Sound and kind of through the end of the band. And that model is such that the band and the audience were, again, kind of all in like the same sound field, kind of like traveling together.
Interesting.
So you would see with the Wall of Sound, like that idea sort of taken to like its ultimate expression, wherein the full sound system was like behind the band, and the musicians and the audience were all hearing the same thing because there weren't these monitors at their feet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, sort of going back to this realization that I had when I started working on this book, that to tell this story, I kind of had to begin at the very beginning, because it was this years-long quest, this years-long project that sort of peaked in 1974. But really, there was so much work that was happening behind the scenes in this on-ramp stage to the full Wall of Sound proper, which a lot of people are familiar with. The 40-show run that the Dead did in 1974 with like the massive, the big system,
Right.
as Owsley Bear Stanley, the band's original patron and sound man, sort of referred to it at the time. He's like, that's the big system.
That's the big system.
That's the big one. Yeah. Yeah.
Good
It's
old
cool.
Bear.
Oh, Bear, man. Yeah, he's such an integral character in this story. And the first time he saw the Dead perform was in late 1965 at one of these acid tests. And it was so moving, so impactful that in the moment he was basically like, I need to follow this band to the ends of the earth, basically, and like do what I can to sort of contribute to their project somehow.
Yeah.
And he contributed in the form of, high-powered LSD, which he was manufacturing at the
I was
time.
gonna say he was a chemist, right?
He was a chemist. He was sort of like he was kind of a polymath. He was sort of a genius, like in all sorts of different areas. But yes, he, in the mid-60s, was manufacturing millions of hits of acid.
Wow.
So like all of the acid flooding, the Haight-Ashbury and the Summer of Love, and then like all of that product sort of like eked out into the world at large. So Bear was responsible for turning on, quote unquote, millions of people. But very early on in the Dead's history, they weren't even the Dead yet. They were still the Warlocks. And Bear saw them perform and was like, this is unlike anything I've ever experienced before. I need to like hitch a ride with these guys, basically. So he was their patron. He used money that he was making, quite a lot of money from his clandestine LSD manufacturing empire.
Yeah.
And he funneled that into sound equipment for the Grateful Dead in sort of their very earliest days. So from the very beginning, Bear sort of hooked them up with like top flight gear,
Wow.
which sort of like set them on a level above most any other bands at the time. And he would sort of weave in and out of the narrative. Like anyone who reads the book, you'll sort of see he kind of like comes in and out of the picture just because of his legal troubles. He did some time in jail. But yeah, he was sort of their original sound man, and he was kind of the force of ideas behind what became the Wall of Sound. Some of the very early visions of the sound that the Dead wanted to achieve sort of came via Bear when he was tripping on his own product and watching the band rehearse and perform around town. And he would experience the sound as interacting waves of color, is what he called it. So Bear had synesthesia. Synesthesia is when you experience one sense through another.
Oh, I've heard about this.
Right. So he saw sound as color.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, you know,
maybe from what he was making,
exactly.
it changed some of the senses.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is cool.
Yeah, very heady stuff.
Wow.
But yeah, from, you know, early 66 when he sort of was starting to like work with them in an official capacity, he served such a crucial role sort of on the idea front for what became the Wall of Sound. But he needed other more like hands-on technical folks to sort of help actualize his ideas.
Yeah.
So it took a whole cast of characters to build this thing from scratch and make it go. But yeah, Bear, a crucial character in this story. And Bear passed away some years ago, but you know, talking with folks who knew him and worked with him, sort of building him up as a character. He's just like such an interesting person that it was very rewarding, sort of like building up his place in this story. And there's so much more that sort of Bear gets up to in the story that I don't want to reveal.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like so much you can tell because, but wow, like this is awesome. I know there was a book, I think it says 2016, there's a book about the life of Bear, The Life and Times.
Yeah, there was a biography.
Yeah, and it was, Bear. My brother really was, he's a big Deadhead too, and he was really moved by it and was like, wow, there's so much more to know about Bear. We knew he was the audio guy. We knew he was, you know, manufacturing this and giving it out to people, like maybe the people in Colorado who was talking about Sunshine Acid, that was his at that time. You know, like, wow, you know.
Yeah, I mean, some of the most iconic, recognizable varieties of LSD came from Bear's lab. You know, Blue Cheer, White Lightning,
wow,
Orange, right.
Blue Cheer.
All that sort of stuff, right?
I love it.
So yeah, he was just one of many like crucial characters in this story, and I knew that if I was going to do it right, and if I was going to break new ground and offer something fresh and, you know, be additive. Like as a journalist, you want your reporting to be additive, you know? And for this story, I didn't want to just like rehash Grateful Dead lore that people have heard a million times.
Right.
Like I didn't want to write just another book about the Grateful Dead because there's been so many wonderful books that have been written about this phenomena known as the Grateful Dead. And there's so much scholarship out there. So I knew that if I was going to do this, I really had to find like a fresh way into all of this stuff. And telling the story of the Wall of Sound was a way to do that. But I knew that I had to get right, like everyone who was in the room in this moment, who was still alive, who was willing to talk to me. Like I needed to get all of those people.
Yeah.
And I went to great lengths to get some of these people.
You interviewed a ton of people, right?
Tons of people,
to get this research done. Not
so
only
many.
did you listen to music and maybe do some Blue Cheer, but you a lot of research.
So much research.
Well, and I love the character page. I love that the first thing you see in this book is introducing you to the characters.
Yeah, I had this realization when I was still writing the book that, you know, I go to great lengths, like in the writing itself, to make it clear who all of these people are, so that anyone who's reading this, they'll be able to keep all of the characters straight. But it sort of occurred to me that it would still be helpful for readers to just kind of have like a reference page at the very beginning of the book, sort of like if you read an oral history or almost like a play, you know, like all of the characters sort of listed out at the beginning. I figured that would be helpful for folks who, you know, might not be familiar with like a lot of the names in this story, like folks who might not be super familiar with Dead World, but who are maybe curious just about like, you know, sound.
Absolutely.
Or like, you know, music or bands or whatever, like if they're coming to this and they don't have, great familiarity with like some of these names, just having them on their own page at the beginning, sort of broken out by theme, right? So I have like all the band members listed, all of the roadies listed, all of the sort of like technicians and like sound consultant types, all of the kind of like, Dead family / folks who are working in like their in-house like travel agency and their booking firm, like all this sort of stuff.
Well-oiled machine that takes so many
people,
parts
so many people. Yeah. So having them all spelled out right at the beginning so that, right, as people are working through, if they need like a quick reference, they can just go back and
right.
consult.
So I can just go back when I'm like, wait, who was that again? And it's right there.
Yeah.
And it's in this nice, concise kind of listing.
Yeah.
I'm pretty familiar with Grateful Dead, but there were some names in here I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
Or some you're like, yeah, big Steve Parrish. Like you get excited that they're listed.
Yeah, for sure.
One person that I am like flabbergasted about, never heard of in my life.
Yeah.
Is this Ned Langen?
Oh, Ned Legend.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who is that? He's listed as a band member.
Ned is okay. So Ned is a really fascinating human being, and we had some really amazing discussions. So Ned was effectively a member of the Grateful Dead in 1974, certainly, but going back to 1970, he would perform on and off with the Dead.
Okay.
So in 69, 70, he was a student at MIT. He's a genius.
Wow.
And he saw the Grateful Dead perform in Boston in 1969 and was like, completely blown away. He was like a jazz head from like New York City. So to see, folks performing this like searing, ripping psychedelia, he was like, whoa, like what is this?
Wow.
A couple months later, him and some friends brought the Dead back to MIT. And he connected, really hit it off with Garcia and Phil Lesh.
That makes sense with Lesh's background in the jazz and the
for sure
classical world.
Yeah. They just like sparks. They just like really hit it off.
Nice. Okay.
And so yeah, Ned would perform keyboards and eventually when the Wall of Sound was a thing, he had a very state of the art like synthesizer and computer rig. So Ned Legend is the first person to perform with a computer on a stage.
That's what I'm saying. You listed it as synthesizer computer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I remember at one point in my like upbringing of music, I was like, I don't listen to computer music. I want to see band members, you know. But if I knew that the Grateful Dead had a computer on stage, it probably would have changed my whole thing.
Yeah, I know. So,
why is he left out though? Why am I just knowing him now?
So he wrote a piece of music called Sea Stones.
Okay.
And in 1974, Lesh and Ned Legend would perform intermission sets at Wall of Sound shows where they would perform Sea Stones. And they did so at 20 some odd shows in 1974. And as you can imagine, this like very far out, like ambient bio music is sort of how he like describes Sea Stones.
Okay.
Really freaked audiences out. They like did not know what to make of this sort of stuff. Like, the Dead would end their set with like, something completely opposite to this, right? Like they would close with like, I don't know, take your pick of like Dead tunes at the time.
Yeah.
But here would come Ned on his computer rig, and Lesh had this like quadraphonic bass that he could throw each string to a different stack in the Wall of Sound.
Whoa.
And they would perform Sea Stones for like usually around 20 minutes. And this stuff is like harsh, like dissonant noise, and really, really like really groundbreaking stuff. You listen to it now and it still sounds like very fresh, like avant-garde music.
Wow.
But what happened in like the broader Dead narrative is that Ned sort of exited the picture because he kind of wanted to do his own thing by like mid 1975.
Sure.
So like after the Wall of Sound was disassembled and the band was like kind of on hiatus, he went off to do his own thing. And he actually instructed Garcia and Lesh, this is what he told me, to sort of not bring him up in interviews. I think he wanted to like sort of be his own thing.
Yeah.
So, Dyed in the Wool Deadheads will know who Ned Legend is because he wrote Sea Stones, and Ned and Phil would perform Sea Stones at Wall of Sound shows. And, Sea Stones, I think, is like the most radical application of the Wall of Sound. Like Ned could move so much air, and his signal would come through like sort of the iconic like center cluster of the Wall of Sound, which you see is like, it looks like an insect's eye, and it's like a curved speaker array right in the middle of the sound system.
Mm-hmm.
And Ned's signal would go through that, and he could move so much air that he could bounce the entire Wall of Sound up and down by a foot.
What?
So like, it's really, really amazing stuff, what he was doing. But yeah, I think he wanted to sort of stake out on his own as an artist, and sort of be his own entity. So he's, I wanted to give Sea Stones some love in the book, and I give it a decent amount of space.
Good.
Because yeah, it's the most out there radical application of the Wall of Sound, and it also, Sea Stones fits into the lineage of like the Dead's experimentation. If you look at like sort of the the lineage from like Feedback, in like 68, 69, and then came Sea Stones, and then after that came Space. Like it's in the same continuum of like just way out sonic exploration that the Dead were always about, like even as they were playing, tunes down by the riverside, right? Like they were all about like crazy sonics and exploration in the audio world. So I wanted to be sure that like Sea Stones got into this story because it's a very important part of like just the very, very groundbreaking stuff that they were up to.
I'm so glad you did.
Yeah,
seriously, because this is another part of this lore of this band that I'm still learning, know, and that's what's beautiful about, I think, a lot of the things we love is there's always more to find out, but the Dead is so rich and so deep and so different, and there's so many things. Like, I think I've heard of Sea Stones, but not much, and when you had this guy Ned listed here, I'm like, is this a misprint? Who's this guy?
Ned.
It was a beautiful moment to be like, there's always more to explore, which is so fun.
And Sea Stones, like the studio record came out in 1975.
It says like April 1975.
April 1975, so at the time, the Dead had their own, they had their own in-house label, Grateful Dead Records, and then Round Records for
interesting.
For Round Records was like Garcia's solo efforts, and just sort of any kind of like adjacent Dead records. So Sea Stones came out like on the in-house label, and at the time, for one reason or another, like it was kind of a flop. But I have to think part of that was because it was just so ahead of its time. Sea Stones was, it did get reissued somewhat recently. So I have it on vinyl, and you throw that on and you're like, this just still sounds like so fresh and out there, just very avant-garde. Shout out Ned. Yeah, he's an amazing person.
That's so great. And you were able to talk to him and interview him for this.
Yeah. He did some really, really great conversations. He has very vivid memories of this time, and he sort of let it known to me that this is probably the last he's going to talk about this stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, so to get him in the book, and there's a couple other characters in the story who actually passed away as I was like working on the book
during
and
the time of the
just like the research and the production of it, and to get these people like in the record, so to speak, like in sort of immortalized kind of in this book, really like means a lot to me. And I wanted to be sure again that like everyone who is still out there who I could get and wanted to talk to me, that like I got them in this story, because it's not just Garcia, right? Like there's so many other people who were like really making this thing happen. And anyone who reads the book will see that like, the members of the band, obviously they were crucial to what was going on, but they almost like flit in and out of the narrative. And like the primary characters are really like, the crew, the technicians, like all these people who were like kind of behind the scenes making this thing go.
Yeah.
And like, the grind of the road and just like making it all happen. Like those are the people who kind of like rose to the surface as like kind of the principal characters of the book.
That's great.
So yeah, talking with all those people, it was just like amazing. Like as a lifelong Deadhead, I was just like, this is crazy that like I'm talking with these people, and some of them have never given interviews.
Wow.
And it just took like a lot of time and patience, and a lot of effort, just kind of like earning their trust. Like
sure.
Kind of passing the righteousness test with some of these people. Like there's a very steep uphill climb as a journalist in Dead World. You're just met with a lot of like initial skepticism, kind of like, who are you?
Yeah.
You're
Fill me in again.
Fill me. You're writing. Sure. Everyone's writing a book about the grave. Come on.
Right.
Yeah. So it took like a lot of questing, so to speak, to get some of these people. But I think it all came together.
It really did. I mean, already just like knowing about Ned and the Sea Stones, I'm reading here. It says, music. This is from T.S. Eliot. Music heard so deeply that it's not heard at all. But you are the music.
Yeah.
That's his take on Sea Stones. Like,
for sure.
Whoa. So this is just a whole other part of, and you're bringing this to this book. Like you said, you wanted to like give credit where credit's due and get the people in who need to before, they maybe don't want to participate or maybe their story isn't told.
Exactly.
I mean, I have this like really exciting feeling right now of like, there's so much more to explore and I'm excited.
Yeah. There's I mean, that's the thing.
And your book is doing that in a concise form.
Yeah.
And it's not read like, audio instructions. It's not
right.
It's a story. You're
for sure.
You're creating characters. You're building, with the main character being this entity of sound.
Totally. Yeah. It's for a general audience. And again, I didn't want to just write like a technical tome. I didn't want to write a journal article.
Right. Because you could and you have.
I could. Right. Yeah. But like, no, this is like, I hope this is a highly digestible and entertaining story about obsessive people. That's like really what the story is about, like obsessives. And I think we can all kind of relate to that in one way or another. Yeah. And it's also just a psychedelic romp. It's a crazy story. And like, you're traveling down the road with the band in this era. That's sort of what I wanted to sort of simulate with the book. So like building up some of these shows like as full scenes, some shows get like, maybe like a paragraph mention. Others just get like kind of a passing reference, but there's so many Dead shows that like I kind of had to make some hard decisions about like what shows do I absolutely need to mention because they were crucial to like the evolution of the sound system, and what shows do I kind of have to discard even though I want to mention them, but like I just don't have space. It's like so just to kind of keep the narrative moving, totally. Like
to keep it fresh and to keep people interested.
For sure. Yeah.
It's really great. I want to know why you wanted to do this. Where does your love from the Grateful Dead come from, and how did you get exposed to the Grateful Dead?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been listening to the Dead my entire life.
Okay. Meaning like since you were a kid? Like
quite literally. Yeah. Both of my parents, real hardcore Deadheads, who sort of orbited the band and each other beginning in the early 70s. And my mother, quick backstory, she was associated with Flipside Records, which is a defunct Chicagoland record store chain that was like big in the early 70s.
Cool.
And Flipside partnered with Howard Stein, who was a big East Coast rock and roll promoter at the time. And he had like a burgeoning Midwest operation. So Flipside would partner with Howard Stein to put on big rock shows at the Auditorium Theater, the International Amphitheater.
Oh, wow.
So she, worked sort of like day of little production odd jobs backstage, not only for the Dead, but any other band in that era. Black Sabbath,
cool.
The Who, King Crimson, Hawkwind,
oh my gosh,
and go down the list. Yeah. So she was kind of around in that era, and my dad was sort of on the other side. He was going to see the Dead just like as a fan.
Oh, cool.
But then in the 80s, my dad sort of got hooked up with the Dead's Midwest local crew. So he was kind of a stagehand, and up at Alpine Valley, Wisconsin, he would, bring out the ornate kind of Afghan style stage rugs that the band would play on. And he would help the crew sort of rig up the speaker arrays that they were using at the time. much different from the Wall of Sound, but like, you know, they owed a lot to like the work that was done in the early 70s. So my parents would bring my sister and I to Grateful Dead shows when we were just toddlers, like in the late 80s. And so some of my earliest flashes of memory, like really core memories, are of seeing the Grateful Dead perform.
Whoa.
So it's kind of just been around, my entire life. And, you know, family road trips growing up. My sister and I would listen to my parents talk about seeing the band in this era when they had this like gigantic sound system, this mountain of speakers, and it was called the Wall of Sound. And it would like blow everyone's minds, right? And so it's just kind of always been captivating to me. And I've just, you know, over the years just kind of gathered little bits of string. And then 2015 came and that first story in Vice came out. And it just feels like it's all just kind of been this progression up to like doing the full on book on this thing.
Wow.
So yeah, people ask me like, how long have you been working on this book? And there's kind of three answers. Like basically early 2023 is when I had to sit down and kind of crack my knuckles and start writing this thing in earnest. But 2015 is kind of when I had the initial flash of the idea for the book that I kind of filed away.
Yeah.
But the real answer is I've kind of been working on it my whole life, I feel like.
That's amazing. I love the three answer because it's true. I'm like, I've heard you say 15, and then 2023, I'm like, that was pretty quick. For all this content? No way. But you've been really working on it your whole life.
Yeah, I laid so much groundwork on it. Like when the time came to actually sit down and write the book, I had basically 150 pages just of like raw timeline that I had amassed, over like basically this first grand like 10-year era of the band.
Wow.
65 to the end of 74. I had all of that mapped out like through the lens of the sound and the sound system. So when it came time to sit down and write, I was like really thanking my past self that I had done so much legwork. But there was still so much I had to do, just like more reporting and more research and, you know, some little adventures that I ended up kind of going on in the production of this book.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had amassed so much groundwork going into this thing. Yeah.
Sure. I'm sure. I mean, there's a lot here, but it's so concise and so easy to read. It's not, like I said, it's not an audio manual. It's not like, okay, this is just a timeline. It's very dry. It's very much a narrative, and there's characters and there's, you know, climax, and it's a beautiful thing. I mean, really and truly, I'm honored to have it. Part of my collection.
Yeah, no, it's honored to be here talking with you about it. Yeah, it's very surreal.
Isn't it?
Honestly,
it's finally that you're at this point of the, you know.
It's like, there it is.
You're about to go on book tour, right? Is what I heard.
Going on book tour, we're doing New York City on June 16th.
Wow.
Philadelphia on the 17th, which is Pub Day.
Okay.
And then we come back here to Chicago, June 19th. We're doing a little hometown meltdown at the G-Man Tavern.
Yes.
Myself and dear friend Josh Terry, he will be my conversation partner. And Dead Inside, the local DJ duo, all live, all vinyl, all dead monthly party, will be spinning records. It's going to be a wonderful time.
Wow.
And then we go out to the Bay Area. We got to go to the Bay Area.
You
right?
have to.
Yep.
100%.
Have to. So we're out there on June 22nd. And then we come back here to hit the book stall up on the North Shore.
Oh, cool.
On June 25th, I believe. Yeah. So if you're around in any of those places, please come out and say hello.
Support.
Yeah.
When does the book come out? When can people get their hands on it or get their ears on it via listening, like audiobook?
Yeah, just a couple days now, June 17th.
Wow,
so
5 days.
5 days, yeah, this coming Tuesday. Yeah, which is crazy.
Exciting.
We're close.
Goodness, we're so close.
I know.
Yeah. How, does it feel like just so surreal that it's done and that you're here? Or?
Yeah, it feels very surreal, but it's also exciting. It kind of feels like one phase of the project is kind of coming to an end, but like the next big phase of it is kind of just getting going. So like, you know, when you're a journalist, like at a certain point you need to release your story into the world. Like you need to let it fly. Like there's no point in writing a story as a journalist and not have people read it. So like it's very exciting that it's gonna be available everywhere in a couple of days. And sort of transitioning into this phase where now I just get to talk about it, is kind of fun, because there's just like, there's so many little kind of like anecdotes from just the journey of putting it together, that, you know, I'm tickled that I get to talk about all this stuff with people who care about it. But also, like, I'm really, with this book, I really hope to hit sort of a crossover audience of folks who, you know, might think they have like no interest or familiarity with any of this stuff. But I think they do, and there's a lot for them to sink their teeth into with this story. They just need someone to kind of like guide them through it, right? So like with the dead, it's like it can be very overwhelming with people who are sort of unfamiliar with the phenomenon, and I think a lot of people are like, I don't even know where to start, so like I'm not even going to bother.
Or sometimes you feel like you're not part of the club or something, and
exactly.
It's like, oh, everybody's invited to this awesome
for
club.
sure, exactly.
But they need a starting point.
Totally, yeah. So like I didn't want to just like pander to deadheads with this book, and I didn't want to write just another book about the Grateful Dead. Like I want to reach the person who might have no interest or familiarity, or is maybe even like a little skeptical, you know, just to sort of guide them through this story. And part of that, there were some self-imposed bans from the very beginning when I was writing this book that I wouldn't sort of fall into certain like dead-isms that I love, but that I feel are like a little just too like cheeky for this book. So like there's no long strange trip unless I'm referring to like that specific lyric or like, you know, Dennis McNally's book, Long Strange Trip, or the Amazon documentary, Long Strange Trip.
Right.
There's no, you know, on the bus.
I see. You're not using those.
I'm like kind of just not using those because I think sometimes that can be a little bit of a turnoff to people who might be like not completely familiar.
Sure.
And I, don't get me wrong, I love all of that stuff.
Right.
But for the purpose of like reaching like a bigger audience that I think this book could hit, I'm like, I don't want to use some of that insider baseball. Like I really need to explain all of this stuff in a way that someone who has no idea about any of this will be able to like understand.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
Brian, you're killing it, man.
Oh,
Seriously,
thanks.
giving me
Thanks,
goosebumps.
man. Oh.
Had a couple tears in there at one point. I'd tell you about it, but I was thinking how grateful I am to be a part of this and a part of, you know, the Grateful Dead world. It's really a rich and beautiful thing. It's like a living fairy tale or folklore that we can be a part of.
For sure.
And it's so wonderful that you're taking that time to do this for everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm so grateful for it.
Oh, grateful to come on and gab with you.
Me too.
This is great, man.
Thanks to Grateful Web and June Jameson for hooking me up with your the publicist at St. Martin's.
Yes, St. Martin's Press.
Catherine,
Shout out
thank you
Catherine.
so much for getting us in touch, because this is right up our alley for sure.
Yeah, and like I'm a Chicago guy. So
I know.
Coming to the Wizard, like let's go.
I love it. I know. I was like, wait, he's coming in today. I'm like, wait, does he live here? And then as I'm reading it,
I
I'm
live
like,
15 minutes away.
yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so you live in the city?
Yeah, for sure. Up in Andersonville.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah. So people who are from Chicago who read the book, you'll see some of this is like kind of a love letter to Chicago too.
Cool.
I recently made this like something I'd been meaning to do for a long time, but I finally just got around to it. I made this master list of every show that's mentioned in the book.
Whoa.
You know, with the location and the date and like, you know, a link to listen to the tunes. But I believe there's like 8 or 9 Chicago shows that I mentioned in the book over the years. So it'll be fun for, you know, all the Chicago folks out there to pick up those signals, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's super cool. I'm grateful for this. And I think it's exciting, like you said, that now there's more to come. These book chats, these talking about it. There's a whole other, you know, realm that you get to dive into. And it's almost like, you know, raising a kid in the sense of you have to let it go at some point. You have to let them into the world and let them shine, you know?
I know, at a certain point, you just need to let it go.
Just let it go.
Yeah.
You've done everything you can. It's here. It's printed.
It's here, I know.
It feels great in your hands.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this G-Man Tavern
Yeah.
You can get tickets, basically just RSVP. They're free.
Yeah, free, 21 and up. RSVP is free, though.
June 19th.
June 19th. It's going to be sick. It's going to be a very good time.
Sounds awesome. I
Come
think this
on
is a
out.
really cool idea to have Dead Inside, who plays just, vinyl records. They play some of the best Grateful Dead records vinyl.
Yeah, they're great.
And then you and Josh Terry will be talking. And
Yeah,
it's
books
exciting.
will be sold on site through City Lit Books.
Oh,
Will
cool.
be in the house.
Nice. Will you sign them if maybe anybody wants that?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Would love to. But yeah, I mean, I had it in my head for like a Chicago release. It should be like a celebration of the community, So like, I hope that's what this can be.
It is.
It's gonna be great. Yeah, come on out if any of y'all are around and want to have a good time.
I think they will. I think they will. Well, everybody, we're listening to WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. I'm talking to Brian Anderson all about the Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound and the quest for audio perfection, loud and clear.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I love it. So tell us, when we started this, we heard a really nice 20-minute Eyes of the World, and that was from kind of the beginning of the Wall of Sound, right?
Yeah, that was from the tour through the Midwest and the Plains that the Dead embarked on in early 1973. And you'll see in the book, I sort of set up the Midwest as kind of like the proving grounds for various iterations of their sound system. So what we heard from Lincoln, Nebraska, that show, fantastic stuff. That was only, I think, maybe the third or fourth time the Dead had ever performed Eyes of the World. So they're still figuring it out, but it's just an incredible version. And so that tour at the early part of 1973 was really like the first tour with the alembic PA is what it was known as.
To ask about that, because you listed people as alembic, and I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, so alembic alembic is still around. They're a custom instrument manufacturer.
Okay.
And they got in with the Dead in the late 60s and were so intertwined with the Grateful Dead that, the two entities worked very closely in designing the Wall of Sound. So, they even shared like workspace, kind of like a co-working space almost is what we would call it these days.
Yeah.
But I spoke with a lot of folks who are currently still at Alembic. But at the time, Alembic was building like a PA for rent, basically. And by the end of 1971, early 1972, the Dead were just like, why don't we just purchase the Alembic PA from you and take it out on the road with us? And that's sort of what the Wall of Sound kind of grew into. So 72, 73, that era in the book, that's what I just refer to as like the Alembic PA era.
Ah, okay.
So early 73, though, is when like the Alembic PA as a prototype Wall of Sound first went on tour.
Okay.
So those shows are maybe some of my favorite of all time. Like the first show of that run, February 15th, 73, the Dane County Coliseum is like maybe my favorite Dead show of all time. Yeah.
Oh.
So sick. But that whole run is really really amazing. And the Pershing stop in Lincoln, I think, was like the penultimate stop of that tour. And yeah, the playing is it's amazing. I mean, at that point, the Dead were basically an acid jazz band playing rock and roll.
Yeah.
And
That's a good way to put it.
yeah. So, I mean, 73 may also just be flat out my favorite year in Grateful Dead history.
It is mine too, and I didn't know all of this. So
Yeah.
now it's like, oh, well, maybe that's part of why I really love 73.
For sure, yeah. From like the playing, but also just, the developments and the ground that was being broken in terms of like the sound and the sound system that they were building.
Right.
So much crucial work was happening
Wow.
in 73, kind of behind the scenes.
Cool.
Just amazing
I
stuff.
love that. So we heard that to start. Now, what are we going to hear to close our conversation? You picked out something from 74.
Yeah. So the Wall of Sound proper, we're going to hear a little China Cat into
a little China Cat. No big deal.
into I Know You Rider. Yeah, a little China Rider here from June 16th, 1974.
Nice.
At the Des Moines Fairgrounds.
Okay.
Which the Dead performed at in 73 as well. They performed there 2 years in a row.
As I said, there's a picture here with the rainbow.
Yeah,
right? I
that's
was like, whoa.
one of my favorite scenes.
Des Moines.
Yeah, those two shows back to back in Des Moines with like an amazing sound system, just fantastic stuff.
I'm gonna listen to that stuff. Cool.
Insane, yeah. But 74 in Des Moines, June 16th, with the full Wall of Sound. Just an amazing outdoor experience, right?
Wow.
And my mother was at that one as a guest of the band. She wasn't working early in any capacity, but she was sat on a sort of like an observation rider on the stage, Garcia's side.
Whoa.
And yeah, and a buddy of hers from Flipside Records recently unearthed some photos that he took from that show.
Whoa.
Including like very rare like shots of the Wall of Sound, like from the back side of it. Really, really neat stuff.
Wow.
But he found this photo of him and a couple of other people and my mom, who was 20 at the time, sitting like effectively on the stage. So yeah, you know, this show and the 73 Des Moines show, where both of my parents were at that one and a rainbow came out. Yeah, those like have hold such a huge, you know, spot like in my brain for my whole life. So to sort of build those up as scenes was super fun.
I love that.
But yeah, the 74 show in the sun in Des Moines, let's go. It's just great stuff.
I love it. I love it. And, you know, talking about the synchronicity of, you know, the 2015 shows, 50 years. Now it's 60.
Yeah.
I'm actually, there's another part of today, which I'm going to meet June from Grateful Web at Garcia's, the newest venue.
And we're in town.
And they're playing the July 5th show from 2015 to kind of commemorate the 10 years.
Sure.
And so it's just, you know, this lore that continues to make you get, you know, your hair on end, and you feel these feelings of like, we're all there even if we weren't. And
totally.
I'm super glad we have these archives. I mean, we didn't even talk about that, but thank God whoever was doing all this recording and made it so good. Like, it sounds so good.
I know.
Even from, you know, 50 years ago.
For
it
sure,
sounds amazing.
I know. Yeah, and like, you know, there's also a through line in the book of like the rise of the taping community was sort of rising like in tandem with the Wall of Sound as it was building up, and I think there's no coincidence there.
I was gonna say it has to be in tandem away, you know, because I mean some of these recordings I'm like, this is 19 what? Like,
yeah, it's amazing. You listen to it and you're like, this sounds amazing.
It sounds like I'm there, and it's 50 years later.
It's like over 50 years old. Yeah. Crazy stuff.
They're pioneers at that too. Well,
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brian, so much.
Oh,
this
so
was
much.
excellent.
Yeah,
and I hope you have a wonderful book tour.
For sure.
Let's hear some China Rider to get us on out of here. It's WZRD Chicago, 88.3 FM. The Wizard.
Wish I was a headlight, but I know found a train. Wish I was a headlight, all I know found a train. I shine my light through the cool Colorado.
WZRD Chicago, 88.3 FM, The Wizard, Chicago's home for freeform radio since 1974. And oh man, I'm feeling good. My heart is pumping. My body's feeling good because I just got to talk to Brian Anderson, author of Loud and Clear, total retrospective of the entire wall of sound that the Grateful Dead so iconically stood in front of and played through for, just about 2 full years. But the trajectory, the timeline that it took to get to where it was starts from the beginning and ends at the end, So it's really cool that someone put this together. And what's really cool, the first chapter of this book is called The Artifact, and it's all about Brian unboxing this beautiful relic of a speaker, the Artifact, that was shipped to him that he won in an auction, a Grateful Dead auction, now lives in his living room. So one of the actual speakers from the Wall of Sound, Brian gets to look at every day. And it's really beautiful. I'm looking at the picture now, and I'm very impressed. In fact, one of the speakers that I have from like the Colorado, like 1974, 75 is when my uncle got these speakers, and I've acquired them now. When I took off the speaker cover, it looks like what he acquired. And, sound is just an amazing thing to dive deep into. And I never really understood how much I cared about it and how much it matters when you go out to a show and you want good sound until I started being behind the board, until I started manipulating sound here, even on this board. And realizing that I have the power, or the sound person has the power to make a band sound so good. So this book is really exciting, and I can't wait to finish it. Thank you again to Brian, to Catherine, to June, to Grateful Web, and everyone else who participated in getting this interview for us. It's so much fun to be able to talk to people from all walks of life, whether it's musicians, authors, scholars, people who come in here and share their story with us. It fills me with a lot of joy, and I hope you guys get that feeling too through the airwaves. I just checked out the signature in my book. He did sign it for me. It says to my name, which you've heard before, but I shouldn't say it. He said, thank you so much, BA25. He also signed the wall, which was really cool, and gave us a really cool sticker that I placed beside it. Grateful. So a week from tonight, go to G-Man Tavern, 3740 North Clark Street. Tickets are free. You just have to RSVP. 31 Tunes presents a G-Man author series, Loud and Clear, The Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound and the Quest for Audio Perfection. Author Brian Anderson in conversation with Josh Terry and DJ sets by Dead Inside. Book sold on site there by City Lit Books. That starts at 8:30. Doors at 7:30. Go out and check it out. It's WZRD Chicago, 88.3 FM.